with Farhat, but I'll try and make up for it.
No. I would say the beauty lies with you.
Thank you,
Go ahead,
Mr.
Manjeet.
President.
Please do introduce our guest speaker for today.
Thank you. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce today Chaitanya Giri. Chaitanya is a fellow of Space and Ocean Studies at Gateway House, but he is a very, very interesting young man. He is a space scientist, and more specifically, he is an astrophysicist. That means he looks for life forms in outer space. And his current research focuses on aquapolitics and astropolitics, which is the new age techno geostrategy in space and maritime industry and geopolitics, science of space exploration. Prior to joining Gateway House, Dr. Giri has worked as a planetary and astromaterial scientist for nearly a decade. He worked at the Earth Life Science Institute at the Tokyo Institute of Technology, the Geophysical Laboratory at the Carnegie Institution for Science, the Goddard Center, the NASA Goddard Center of Space Flight, and the ELSI Origins Network Fellow. Prior to that, he was at the International Max Planck Max Planck Institute as a research fellow for the Solar System Research in Germany and the University of Nice in France. He is one of the most unusual Indians we have today. At a very, very young age, at just 22, Dr. Giri received his PhD. He finished it in 2 years. And he was part of the scientific crew at the European Space Agency's Rosetta mission to for the comet. I don't know how to pronounce it, Chaitanya, so I'm going to let you do it. But he is really has been a fellow, has received many, many awards and fellowships across the world, in Germany and in the United States and Japan. Apart from everything else, he has been he's one of the few scientists who returned to India to do space for policy. He has worked at JAXA, with the Japan Space Agency, which almost nobody ever works at. The Japanese are very closed and they do not allow others to be in their space agencies. And Chaitanya is one of those very rare people. He has also worked at the European Space Agency, again, one of those very, very rare people. And at NASA, many Indians there, but few have worked in the area that Chaitanya has. He's worked obviously with the Indian government, with the National Security Council at very close quarters. He understands the space ambitions of countries from around the world. He speaks to everybody about space. He speaks to prime ministers, he speaks to national security advisors, but he also speaks to municipal school children in Bombay on space, how to dream about being space scientists. Nothing can stop you from it. Chaitanya is a very unusual person. We're proud to have him as part of our team, and I'm really delighted to introduce him today to the Rotary Club. Chaitanya, over to you.
Thank you, Manjeet. Thank you, Mr. Jamal, for inviting me to your prestigious Rotary Club. Some of my colleagues had visited you all before. They had given their talks, and I've heard all nice things about the club and the fantastic people that makes this club. Let me straight away dive into my presentation. I'll start sharing my screen. Hopefully I'll do it right. Yeah, so that's the topic of my presentation today. India's private sector path to outer space. In the image that we see with this title, we see our fantastic Mumbai. And if we can just point out, we can find Cuff Parade somewhere here. We can find the Gateway of India. We can find the Mumbai airport. And this has all been made possible because of efforts that have been invested by space agencies, which are run by the governments all over the world, as well as the private sector. Now, just an outcome of the heritage industries that have worked in the during the Second World War. The Second World War helped many Western countries acquire huge sums of funds to set up R&D in their respective countries. So you have companies like Boeing in the United States, or EADS, which is now called as Airbus in Europe. They have all come from technologies that were developed during the Second World War. And one of the best outcomes of the Second World War, if anything constructive came out of it, was space technology. And whatever we see today, the rockets, the satellites, the spacecrafts that are launched to other planets, they've all been a product of uh, the Second World War. So let me jump straight away to the current, interest in the country. The current interest in outer space has been, really, hair-raising. Last year, when India attempted to land on the moon, that entire effort gathered immense momentum in the public perception. Uh, most of us, young and old, were all glued to TV channels late in the night, understanding, will Chandrayaan launch successfully? Will it reach the moon? How will it land? Will it share with us the first glimpses, the first images? That helped the government of India really catch hold of the pulse of our public. And this pulse was very different from what it was 30, 40 years ago. So you must be remembering that there was a time whenever there was talk about space aspirations of our country, uh, it used to be countered by another argument that, hey, we need to first build toilets. Hey, we need to first set our basic amenities right, and then only we should start aspiring for all these fancy things. So space was considered fancy, but that has changed drastically. Today, space is an integral part of our lives. The communications that we maintain with our friends and families that have gone all over the world, in Americas, in Europe, in Australia, in Africa, wherever. Uh, I mean, connecting with them is only because of space-based assets. We can monitor our weathers. We were just talking about the weather here in Mumbai. It is again because of space-based assets, meteorology, communications, then Earth observation. If you want to just manage your real estate property, again there, observe farmlands, monitor agricultural activities. Again, Earth observation satellites play a huge role. But the government of India was keeping the entire space activities very close to its heart, because they have nurtured it since independence. And there wasn't much of a private sector interaction up until the past 10, 20 years, when the private sector started, building components and, supplies and some spare parts that used to go and build our rocket that is shown over here, which is the PSLV, or building our spacecraft. So companies like Godrej Aerospace, Tata Advanced Materials, KPIT, Cummins, Walchand Nagar, all these were contributing to certain demands of ISRO, which is our space agency, but they weren't innovating anything. COVID-19 came as a blessing in disguise, because the government, which was a bit reticent, because the space agency and the space scientists who worked there were not very much keen and eager to part way with some of their capabilities with the private sector. But that changed. The government felt that no, we should unleash this hidden potential of ours and allow the private sector to come in and work on an equal pedestal with the space agency, which is ISRO. And that's the reason why we created these space reforms. What does the reforms in the month of May this year? So these reforms include the fact that private sector hereafter, be it the MSMEs or startups or larger corporations, they will all be they'll be given level playing field to enter India's space activities, be part of space missions, innovate, which they weren't innovating up until now. They were just supplying prototypes and designs that were given to them by ISRO. So now they will innovate, they will build their own designs, they will build their own spacecrafts and satellites and rockets, and um, that will give them a chance to plug into the much larger global space economy. And for that, the government has created new agencies like InSpace, which will provide this level playing field. Then there is a new public sector company known as New Space India Limited, NSIL, that will uh, procure technologies that are built by our space agency and sell it in the commercial markets uh, in India as well as globally. And the private sector will be given a free hand to venture out in deep space, go to the moon, go to Mars, build technologies that will take them there, build technologies that will help humans go and stay there for longer time, so on and so forth. So the future is very bright hereafter for India's space program. This is the hierarchy of India's space apparatus. At the top of at the helm of all the entire apparatus is our Prime Minister. The Prime Minister controls two very crucial departments. One is the Department of Space that is shown here, and the other is Department of Atomic Energy, which is very close to Mumbai because the headquarters are just besides Gateway of India. And within the Department of Space, there are several laboratories that are located all over India, from Gujarat, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Madhya Pradesh, all over the place. And within that, so you have the InSpace and NSIL, which were created this year. ISRO has been given the task to handhold the private sector and show them the direction and show them the way to get into the global space industry. But some of our space players have been, intrepid, if I may say so, and they've charted their own paths to get into the global space industry. And I'll give you two examples which are very dear to us. But before that, why are they doing that? So the two examples that I'll be speaking about are Airtel, which is Bharti Global, and the other example is Nelco, which is a subsidiary of Tata's. The crux of their venturing out in an intrepid manner is the fact that they've realized that the socioeconomic growth in 21st century will depend entirely on connectivity. And if you've been following some of the country's larger plans, socioeconomic plans, they have been revolving around these 5 words, which are last mile connectivity. This particular term is part of all policy papers that the government of India releases. Then Rurban, which is a combination of rural and urban. Sillage, this word comes often in technology policy draft papers, which is city plus village. So you want to bring in amenities that are usually given to cities into villages, so that there is no influx of more people from villages into cities. Then there is Gramodaya, which is a word that is often used in several policies. Gramodaya is the rise of villages. And Pura, which was very close to our President Abdul Kalam, and that stands for providing urban amenities to rural areas. So what is the first and foremost missing factor in rural areas? Connectivity of any kind, be it electricity, be it telecom, be it internet. And this has been So the bridging mechanism in providing connectivity is space technology. And that's the reason why more and more private sector players are from all over the world are venturing into the space industry. So take for instance the pie chart which is shown on the right hand side. You would find that the satellite industry, which is dominated by the private sector, constitutes almost $260 billion of the entire 355 billion dollar global space market. And the non-satellite industry includes only $84 billion. Within that, India's share is a paltry $4.3 billion because our space program is entirely supported by the government. There is very minimal private sector participation. But the new reforms will change this dramatically. And the private sector players from India will eventually get into these quartet, which is shown on the left-hand side. At the top of the quartet is the space industry, then the services industry for space-based application, then a subset which is the service equipment industry, which will build equipments, and then the end user, which are the applications. So you would find that you will, in the coming days or coming months or years, you will have mobile applications in your mobile phone, which will provide you data that is gathered from outer space, from satellites that are located in the Earth's orbits. So that's an immense market which is coming up. I like this image very much. This is a high altitude balloon which was launched by a company known as Loon, Loon. Not many know about this company, but it's a subsidiary of Alphabet. And what is Alphabet? The parent company of Google. So Google is wanting to provide last mile connectivity to many parts of Africa, because Africa is the last place to be explored for industries from all over the world. And Google is venturing out in providing internet and 5G services through these balloons. So you have a balloon and you have a small satellite-like structure which is attached to it at the bottom of the balloon, and that carries several transponders. And these transponders communicate with ground-based stations. And these ground-based stations then disseminate that data to all the receiving mobile phones or gadgets that you may find in the forests of Africa or the deserts of Sahara or all these remote regions. So Google has taken that initiative, and this is a very Africa-centric project. So another fantastic fact about that particular balloon was that it was launched from Puerto Rico in the Caribbean, and that balloon traveled all across the South Atlantic. Then it entered into the Indian Ocean. It was carried by the wind currents in the air, and then it eventually entered Kenya, where it was steered, and when it started, transmitting data that was built there. In the coming days and months, Loon will launch many more such balloons that will provide internet services to remote regions. They have also shown interest in providing internet services to remote parts of India, particularly Northeast India. But in this scheme of things, you have then companies like Jio, which are growing like behemoths. So how is Jio placed in the scheme of things? So let me give you an example. So look at the left side of this particular chart. You have Jio, which is an Indian digital services company, which is providing 5G network, 4G networks in the conventional manner. They're also bringing in optic fiber cables to our homes and providing high-speed data. They also have a backend R&D department, which is, I think it's located somewhere in the Vashi, Navi Mumbai campus. But they do not yet have a space technology company in their ambit. Okay, so let's keep that aside now. Now come to Google, the example that we just spoke of. Google is not a hardware company, it's a services company. So it has tied up with a company known as Telesat, which builds satellites. Telesat gives the hardware to Google. Likewise, you have Facebook, which is also a services company. It's a social media company, but it is also tied up with a satellite manufacturing company known as Maxar. Maxar is an American company again. So Maxar is providing R&D to Facebook. And both these companies, Google and Facebook, are in the race of building satellite constellations that will go in the Earth's orbit. Constellation as in there will be multiple satellites doing the same, serving the same purpose. And these satellites will be transmitting data all over the world without any need for ground-based, without any need for, all the towers that you see on building tops, on the terraces of buildings. I believe Geo will go the same way in the next few quarters. I'm not very sure, but they are in talks about acquiring another space satellite manufacturing company. Another important company that we should speak about is Bharti Global, the parent of Airtel. So when there were talks about Airtel not standing up to the giant Geo that is coming up, people were, a bit, they weren't much confident about Airtel and its prospects in the near future. But they pulled a surprise by acquiring shares in a company called as OneWeb. OneWeb is a Virginia-based company today, with Airtel as one of the stakeholders, and the other stakeholder is the UK government, Her Majesty's government. So both these stakeholders are now resurrecting OneWeb, which was in some financial distress, and they will soon start providing space-based internet and 5G and 6G services. 6G is in the next generation of services, telecom services. Now, Airtel, as we all know, has deep inroads in the African market. They have provided 3G services in Africa, and they continue to be one of the biggest players there. With OneWeb, they'll penetrate even more into other regions where they don't have access, and eventually they'll acquire a huge share of the space-based telecommunications market. So you have Geo that has gone the optical fiber way, and you have an Airtel that has gone the satellite internet way. Now, that's a very peculiar thing to happen, and all this has happened without support from ISRO. Okay, so these are intrepid companies. They know where the market lies. They know what sort of future do they have, and they are out there in the first instance to reap dividends. So this is a way in which OneWeb will work. They have user terminals, which are our modems, which are modem-like equipments, which you can keep at home. And they have a network of ground stations that are laid all over the world. And these ground stations will receive data coming from the satellites, and they will transmit it to the receivers that are located in your offices, in your homes. And you will find Airtel providing these services in the next 2 or 3 years, even in India. So that's the next revolution coming up. I've already spoken about Airtel. They have a R&D backend in form of OneWeb. They have a finance partner in the form of Her Majesty's government. The company that is building satellites for OneWeb and Airtel is Airbus, which is your aircraft company, which is also a subsidiary active in the space industry. So you have Indian companies now becoming part of global ecosystems, space technology ecosystems. And this is a very promising sign. Industry has always been part of space activities, be it in United States or even in Russia, the then Soviet Union. But uh, wherever there is democracy, wherever there is a free open market, wherever there is scope for innovation and creativity, industry flourishes. And with this, with these two images, I'm trying to just um, you know reiterate that fact. So on the right hand side, you find is the space shuttle, which is now retired. It is now lying in uh, uh, museum very close to Washington, Udvar Hazy. And then on the left hand side, and see people, you have people there, you have people gathering, clicking photographs. They love it. It's a heritage for them. It's a national heritage for them. But on the left hand side, there is another space shuttle which is lying in a decrepit manner, and that's Buran. That was a space shuttle which was 3 times larger than the American space shuttle built by Russia, but Russians didn't pay much attention to it. It only made 2 flights, both successful, but since the Russian industry at that point of time was entirely controlled by the government, uh, it couldn't innovate, it couldn't bring in new business models, and it suffered from this particular fate. So industry plays an important role, and unleashing the industry's creativity becomes the foremost responsibility of any government. And with this space reforms of May 2020, Indian government has, respected that, respected the importance of that creativity. But why are these changes happening so suddenly in a very short span of time? As you all know, and as you may have heard and read in numerous newspapers and magazines, that we are on the anvil, we are at the doorsteps of the fourth industrial revolution. And that also means that we are also at the doorsteps of the second space age. So when did the first space age begin? It began with the Sputnik movement, when Russia launched that satellite in outer space. It triggered a race with the United States. Eventually, United States, caught up. It zoomed past Russia, and it caught hold of the entire innovation industry, global innovation industry. And this span took almost 60 years. So the first satellite was launched in 1960s, the first years of 1960s, and we are in 2020. So it's been 60 years. We are now at the advent of the fourth industrial age, and whatever technologies that will be spun off, let's say excessive digitization, decline of fossil fuel, we are looking at electric vehicles now, we are looking at hydrogen powered vehicles, we are looking at heavy use of robotics and mechatronics, we are looking at gene modification, CRISPR recently got a Nobel Prize. So it's a Nobel Prize winning technology. And all this will also spill over onto the type of space technologies that we build hereafter. And that's why we are at the doorsteps of the second space age. And resultingly, for the same reason, many countries are now coaxing and pushing their private sector to come out and get into the global space industry, grow their stakes, and help the countries sustain the next generation economies. And the second space age has already begun. If you see, in 2017, there were more than 280 small satellites that were launched. Now, why small satellites? For a very long time, when Americans or Indians, we were launching, let's say, I'll give you an Indian example. We used to often hear about Indian satellites being launched from French Guiana in the Caribbean. So it used to be launched by a company known as Ariane. And very often we used to find that our communication satellites, which used to then weigh around 2.5 to 3 tons, 3,000 kilogram satellites, they were launched from French Guiana because we were not capable of launching that heavy satellites. But slowly, as the world moved towards the fourth industrial age, these satellite sizes shrunk. they shrunk in the same manner as our televisions, as our mobile phones, and as our, those who were using typewriters, they went on to iPads. So miniaturization is a hallmark of the fourth industrial revolution, and that happened in the satellite sector as well. Today, we are launching somewhere around 400 to 500 nano satellites, which are small satellites, every year. And that means even smaller rockets can now launch these satellites, because these satellites are small in size and they don't weigh that much. And that's the reason why you have Indian startups such as Vikram Aerospace and Agnikul. These are startups. You might have read their names somewhere. They are now wanting to enter into this market and be the carriers of satellites. So transporters, so goods carriers, as we say as we see on the Indian highways. They will be the goods carriers of our space-based assets. Then you have countries like Luxembourg, New Zealand, United Arab Emirates, who have never had a space agency before, who never were in the space industry. They've suddenly caught fancy of certain sectors. So for instance, Luxembourg is very keen on mining asteroids and mining on the moon. And they have made very strong policy level reforms within their government. Same way, New Zealand, they are currently the world leader in small satellite launches. The image that you see in between is that of the rocket that is built by New Zealanders in cooperation with the Americans. And on the right hand side, you will find a logo of a mission known as HOPE, which was launched in August 2020, just a couple of months ago. This is a Emirati mission, which is flying towards Mars. Imagine Emiratis going to Mars. The world has come to that stage now. Smaller countries, city-states are now interested in venturing into outer space. Then you have, very novel concepts like this particular car, or a SUV, as you may say. This is built by Toyota and in cooperation with the Japanese Space Agency. And in the next 10 years or so, this SUV will be traversing on the surface of Moon. And this has been chosen as the, vehicle of interest by Americans, especially the current Trump administration, who's wanting to take humans back to the moon and help them settle for longer durations than the Apollo era astronauts. And if they settle there for longer duration, they'll need these vehicles. These are all electric and hydrogen powered vehicles. So as I conclude my talk, I'll just give you a brief glimpse about Mumbai. Very close to where most of you all stay is the Colaba Geomagnetic Observatory. That is where our space program began in the 1800s. So that was the period when telegraph came in, telegraph was invented, telegraph cables were being laid all over the world by the Dutch and the French and the British through the East India companies. And they wanted an equipment, they wanted an observatory that could monitor the well-being of those telecommunication lines, because those were very important for them at that point of time. So that is where our space program began. Eventually, as we came closer to our independence, many Indian physicists and chemists took charge of what would make the post-independence India's strategic programs. And Mumbai played an important role, because two very important laboratories. One is the National Physical Laboratory, which is located in Delhi, and National Chemical Laboratory, which is located in Pune. They played stellar role before the establishment of ISRO in setting the first plinth of our space program. And all that began with the building which is shown on the left-hand side. You must all be seeing this building as you travel in the city. This is the Institute of Science, which is currently under the Maharashtra government, but it used to be once known as the Royal Institute of Science, and it was a watering hole for the best scientists of the country as well as of the city. Our very own Mumbaikar, Homi Bhabha, was the first to decipher the importance of balloons for communications and for meteorological measurements. He set up a balloon facility in Hyderabad, and it continues to exist, but it wasn't commercialized the way Google has done with its Loon company. Again, another anecdote. Vikram Sarabhai. Sarabhai was not a Mumbaikar, but many of the establishments that he built in Ahmedabad had great, deep financial linkages, deep philanthropic linkages with Mumbai. The Vikram Sarabhai library right now is maintained by Tata Consultancy Services. When he was alive, he was able to get samples from the moon, which were procured by Apollo 11 missions. And some of the samples had come to TIFR in Kolaba in 1970 or 71. I don't remember that year. But Mumbai has its fair share of contribution to early years of India's space program, but it eventually dwindled in the past few decades. But it won't continue that way. Mumbai will again find ways to get into the goals that are set by the global space community, as shown in this particular diagram. In this decade of 2020s, many space agencies, including Indian, are wanting to explore the moon, particularly the south pole of the moon, because it has huge reserves of water ice, and that can be used for setting up human establishments. And by the decade of 2040s, the goal is to send humans to Mars for long duration missions. And let me tell you, this is not a feat that will be accomplished by one country, any one country, even if it is a powerful country as the United States. It will be a cooperative affair. It will be undertaken through diplomatic means, through international linkages and partnerships. And these partnerships won't be limited to space agencies or on the government level. This will spill over onto industry level or academic level partnerships. And the future is bright. Let me end by showing this particular image. This is the Artemis program of the Americans. They are wanting to send astronauts, landers, rovers, the vehicle that I just showed, which is built by Toyota, all in the span of next 10 years to the moon. And I'm sure some of our startups, space startups and technology startups, will play a huge role in fulfilling that ambition. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chaitanya. That was really fascinating. We have many questions for you.
Yeah.
Let's start with Mudit. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Giri, for your crisp presentation. My question is, from a business standpoint, have you assessed what is the private sector market size, what it is currently, and what it will grow to, say, maybe 2025 or 2030 in terms of crores or dollars?
You're asking about the global market, right?
No, I'm talking about the Indian market. The government of India has privatized, you have saying, or encouraged private sector to participate in the space program. So what is the potential of the private sector in India's space market in terms of rupees?
In terms of rupees, yes. I'll tell you what, the projection for the next 10 years is around 15 to 20,000 crores. Most of it will come from MSMEs and startups, because and if you see the full circle, most these MSMEs and startups are suppliers to a lot of bigger corporations. I see that the bigger corporations will be a bit risk averse, but the risk taking ability lies within the MSMEs and startups. And what they'll do is they will not only plug themselves into the Indian space market, they'll also create an export based market. And this has been witnessed with one of the companies which is now contributing to the Artemis program of the Americans. And it's an Indian company known as Team Indus. So the MSMEs have a huge scope. 15 to 20,000 crores is the projection.
We have Gautam Mehta who wants to ask a question.
Hi, Dr. Giri. Very nice presentation. And the question is this: what is going to be the effect of space debris on Earth as well as the future exploration of space from Earth?
Yeah. There are many startups who have prototypes ready for clearing space debris. And these startups are located in, some of them are in Australia, some of them are located in Europe, some of them are located in United States. And they have technologies to demonstrate. These will be working like minesweepers. Their technology, and they'll just go out, spread their, let's say, spread their bed sheets, just accumulate all the debris and gather them into one tiny spot and just dispatch them back to Earth for recycling. So there are many such mechanisms that are being currently developed. But having said that, the orbits around Earth span from 100 kilometers, 120 kilometers where the space station exists, the International Space Station, and up to 36,000 kilometers where the geostationary satellites are. So there is a huge, expanse to cover, and it will depend upon where these companies try to locate themselves. Most of the debris will lie in the low Earth orbit because it will come from Earth observation satellites and constellations that I just spoke of. They won't be located at great heights. They'll be only 100 to 150 kilometers. And yeah, they are finding a good market for themselves.
Thank you.
Jagdish Malkani, you're up next.
Dr. Chaitanya, fascinating talk. Just a quick one. Where does Atmanirbharta stack up in such a global industry where you need such a lot of huge deep pockets, ideas, technology, etc., and especially when we've been dealt this double whammy of Corona and the economy's gone for quite a toss.
Yeah. If you remember, in one of the slides, I showed that the global space economy for the year 2018 was somewhere around $350 billion. In the month of September, last month actually, the global space economy registered a growth of $25 billion in the Corona period since March. And if you see that there was numerous launches that were happening in the United States and China, we were a bit slow. We didn't carry out any activities, but we carried out far-reaching reforms. The current economy, global economy is measured at $420 billion. 420, which is not a good number, but $420 billion. So that has registered growth. And with greater participation of MSMEs and startups, you will find even greater growth, at least in the domestic market. So in the next quarter or so, there are plans to launch a new rocket, operationalize a new rocket that was built by ISRO. It's called a Small Satellite Launch Vehicle, and that is said. So the government is saying that they are interested in parting ways with that rocket to the private sector. So the private sector can, use it as their taxi service. There is a great potential. The whammy, the double whammy, as you say, has come as a blessing in disguise, at least for the space sector. Because we've been able to correct a lot of our, earlier policies, which were caught hold by the bureaucrats in science, and we've unleashed them because they were in no position to oppose them.
Thank you.
Shani, you're next. Shana Zakil online.
Yeah, Dr. Giri, very interesting. We've heard a lot about 4G, 5G having an impact on the environment and health. What is your belief and what can you comment on it?
4G doesn't, 5G does to a certain extent, because the wavelength that 5G uses is slightly in the detrimental range, and it has detrimental effects on health, but only if you are exposed continuously for hours and hours. And if you're sitting very close to the transmitter that is transmitting the 5G signals, very close to the towers. But having said that, we are also moving towards 6G very rapidly. And once 6G comes in, the health effects will dwindle. Because the transmitter is not located very close to you. It's located out there in outer space. So 5G does have effects, but only if you sit very closely to the transmitter.
Okay, thank you.
Nandan Maluste, you're next.
Yeah, hi. The fascinating, eye-opening presentation. Thank you. The last point that you made was, of course, a little frightening because we were all looking forward to the 5G, and if it's going to affect our health, there have already been so many horror stories around Mumbai. Coming back to my real question, you started your presentation by talking about some of the impacts that we could see on the ground. For example, for surveys of land, agriculture, weather, etc. And of course, taking a leaf out of Jagi's question, potentially, I suppose, health services could be supported, for example, by 5G and 6G. But could you tell us about some more of this? For example, it was said to Prime Minister Vajpayee about a decade ago that the greatest impact on India's economy could be made by a very simple change, which is improvement of land records. What we currently have is presumptive land records. So if Jaggi owns some land in Alibag, it's assumed he owns it because his name appears in the land register. But that land register actually defines who is paying the taxes and not who actually owns it. Plus, as we all know, the boundaries are not well defined. So are some of these kinds of challenges on the ground amongst the priorities of the space program out of India?
Yes, they are. Yeah, that's a really interesting question and a timely question, because we've just made some very important reforms even within our agriculture sector.
That's true.
There are several connecting factors here. I'll start with something that is very outlandish. Luxembourg, when it entered into the space industry and when they said that we want to enter into asteroid mining, the first thing that you do before mining an asteroid, which is a small blob of rock, is you geo-survey it, you map its mineralogy, and then you put the entire real estate present on that asteroid into into certain fragments where you can apply or whichever fragment has the most amount of mineral concentration. Similarly, if you look at here on Earth, you can use technologies such as blockchain to link land records that are measured and mapped by satellites. So let's say a particular geographical coordinate in Alibag, you just mentioned Alibag, is recorded in somebody's name. And if that record persists on the blockchain, as well as it can be verified through that satellite image, here you go, you have a solution there. Insurance is another sector. Let's say tomorrow, because of climate change, because of erratic weather, a certain farmer suffers damages in the farm. You can verify the extent of those damages by just looking at the satellite image of his farmland. And that can be easily made possible. Similarly, I know of an example which is present in Canada. A lot of Canadian satellites are employed entirely by the Canadian agriculture sector, particularly in the provinces of Saskatchewan and Alberta and Manitoba. So these are the regions, the Midwest of Canada. It faces a lot of hailstorms and severe hailstorms. So to protect these farmers from these hailstorms and provide them the necessary compensations and claims, you have these satellites working for them. I believe these kind of applications will soon come up. And I know for one that a few private sector banks in India are already interested in it, and they're working on, beta level technologies in this domain. One that I can think of right now and remember is ICICI. It's working on this vertical very closely. And
Working on what exactly? Sorry.
On use of satellites for insurances, agricultural insurances.
Great, thank you.
Manjeet, you had a question? Manjeet? All right, while we wait for Manjeet, let's have Farhat ask his question.
I'm here.
Oh, you're there.
Okay, let Farhat,
No, go ahead, Manjeet.
Okay. Okay. So Chaitanya, just 3 questions actually for you. One is, A, can you explain what 6G is exactly? Second question is, why aren't all the new small country space aspirants using ISRO to launch their satellites? Why are they using Japan and other countries? And the third question is, on agriculture satellites, you wrote a very interesting piece saying how countries like Argentina that don't even have a space sector still are able to use their constellations, have developed constellations, space constellations, and are actually helping Indian private sector companies to map land for agriculture purposes. So, and how that will help people who are all the migrants who come back into India, how are they going to be able to benefit from this? Are they going to be able to, I mean, we've got so many people who've come back to their villages. Are they going to be able to insert themselves into their agriculture space, and how can they do it while upgrading the systems, and what role can satellite play in that? So.
Yeah, I'll go in the reverse order. The article, that particular article, I wrote that article when there were news of, huge efflux of migrants from cities to villages. And this was in the month of April. And the first and foremost thing to come to my mind was that what will happen if they don't come up back to the cities? Most of them have come again because things are going back towards normalcy. But there is another probability that people from hinterlands who have been educated here with engineering degrees, they have worked in the services sector, and they wouldn't want to come back. What happens to them? So there are certain programs which are run by industry organizations, one being NASSCOM, where they are using new Industry 4.0 technologies for agriculture. So they're building these technologies as per India's robust, robust climatic and environmental factors, and they're deploying them in those fields. And see, when you have an educated population going back to villages, they bring skill sets that they have acquired in the cities, and they would want to implement those in the rural realms. And I believe people with skill sets will start using space technology. And with the reforms that have come up, and with the farmers now getting free access to the market without the middlemen, there will be a greater emphasis on use of technologies of all kinds, be it field-based technologies or be it space-based technologies, because the foremost thing on their mind would be to increase the output of their yield, to increase their yield. And for that reason, space technology will be harnessed in a great manner. Second example was Argentinian a satellite company. The Argentinian satellite company has tied up with UPL, United Phosphorus, and United Phosphorus has classically been an agrochemical company. Again, you see an agrochemical company tying up with a satellite company just to monitor the yield. And UPL has been doing that in Argentina, and I hope in the coming months they will start implementing the same model in some of their interested geographies in India. And the first question was, what is 6G? Up until 5G, we had transmitting equipments that were located terrestrially on land, on your terraces, building terraces, on TV towers. But 6G involves a drastic change where you have transmitters going from terrestrially into the extraterrestrial realms in outer space. So that will be a sea change. And that's the reason why you have this ongoing Cold War between United States and China, because each of them are wanting a bigger stake in that particular market. And it's a novel market. It's a sea change in the way telecom equipments were being built and deployed.
Thank you.
Yes, Farhad, go ahead, please.
Yeah, a quick question, Dr. Giri. That's something that is the business that I am in. What do you see as future of space tourism? Because there is so much has been tried, experimented. Virgin Galactic, Elon Musk is involved in it. There is a space, what is called space mission. They've also kind of booked, I think, several wealthy, so to say, but the owner of Cirque du Soleil, and there's a guy who's invested in space, so to say, industry. Well, how do you see this happening? I mean, is it a reality, or is just a try that they're making?
It's a reality that was stuck in some bureaucratic issue. I remember seeing this movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey. This was a movie that was made in 1966 or 67, and it had fantasized then Pan Am, which used to be an airline company, Pan American, taking flights for tourists and travelers from America into Earth's orbit and then to the moon. See, that has been in the minds of several industries, but it was only waiting for the liberalization of the entire space sector, and the liberalization began with America. So I'll tell you that an anecdote. After 2011, when Americans retired their space shuttle, they didn't have a rocket that could carry American astronauts from American soil to the International Space Station, in which it is one of the stakeholders. So all the American astronauts used to travel to Kazakhstan, to Russia, and get launched from there. Now that gives stomachache to a lot of Americans, and from there you had SpaceX. SpaceX today has entirely reduced American dependence on Russia. At the same time, it has come across as a breath of fresh air, and you'll have companies like these who would take who will do the heavy lifting of tourists from Earth to the space stations. Now, setting up a space station is easy, and it is easier than having a proven and a safe rocket. So, what tourists would want is safety. If there is a space rocket that provides safety and reliability and efficiency, economic efficiency, you will have tourism starting in no time. And I'm sure with greater interest in private sector construction of rockets, I think it's soon going to be a reality.
Thanks very much, Dr. Giri. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
I hope
Chaitanya.
I hope there will be a Taj space station.
That was indeed very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
May I now request Honorary Secretary Satya Nisrani to propose a vote of thanks?
Sure, Fali, with pleasure. Dr. Giri, that presentation was truly eye-opening for us. It's great to see India's evolving role in space exploration and research. And with the government's fresh impetus, I'm sure we will soon have our own private space exploration companies competing with the likes of SpaceX and Loon. And probably will also allow us to have some of our Rotary meetings in outer space and on a planet of our choice. As a token of our appreciation for the afternoon that you have spent with us, we will, on your behalf, light up a rural household using solar power. We will send you the certificate